So if you don't know who the Olmecs are, they are Mesoamerica's most ancient and mysterious civilization. They gave birth to the Mesoamerican calendar, writing, and megalithic stonework. They arrive in the historical record as a fully formed civilization, seemingly out of nowhere, and erect the largest monuments that Mesoamerica would ever see at the very beginning of time. And before you ever venture off into the Olmec heartland, the only thing you can think of when anyone mentions the Olmecs are the colossal basalt heads, weighing anywhere from 6 to 52 tons. But once you explore the Olmec realm on foot, you begin to realize that there is so much more out there to be seen and uncovered. One of the first things that I saw at the site of La Venta are these scattered basalt columns used to erect something that most people have probably never seen before, which I call column tombs. They kind of look like Lincoln logs, and these were probably brought in shipments by the dozens from the Sierra de la Tuxtla Mountains of Veracruz, over 90 kilometers away. But of course, no body has ever been found in these column tombs. And granted, that may be because the acidic soil erodes everything away, leaving nothing for archaeologists to find over 3,000 years later. But it's still a mystery. I took measurements of these basalt columns, some of which had been smashed or broken apart or had fallen, and I did a calculation that gave me an estimate which put the average column anywhere from around 2 to 7 tons. But some were of course much larger than this, sometimes more than twice as large. Now it seems that not all of these basalt columns were being used for assembling tombs. We can really only speculate as to what the other uses were for, but some people have proposed that they were used for encircling ceremonial or exclusive areas, or even acting as stone fences or walls with the limited evidence that we have, which is almost none. The use of these columns in their entirety is still a mystery. Like I was saying earlier, some of these columns are actually twice as large and twice the length of a standard column. This one here is about 12 feet tall, putting it somewhere in the range of 13 to 15 tons. While this fallen column, measured to be about 20 feet long, is perhaps somewhere around 20 tons. And you have to keep in mind that in all likelihood, the Olmecs were transporting multitudes of these all at once, which might actually be a bigger feat than transporting one single head at a time, which is just simply amazing. The next surprise was the tall stelae standing out in front of the Great Pyramid of La Venta. Now, the pyramid itself is not made of stone, of course, it's packed earth, but it's composed of about 200,000 tons of earth and fill. Now, just imagine the kind of organization and wealth that it takes to commission a structure of this size, while you're also commissioning thousands of tons of basalt from over 90 kilometers away, as well as hundreds, if not thousands of tons of jade and serpentine stone from deep within the jungles of Guatemala. These were powerful people to be able to erect huge 15-foot tall monuments at the base of their pyramid. Now, do we have any idea as to what the meaning is behind the artworks found on these stelae and anywhere else in the Olmec world? Well, not really. Almost all of the context which gives us meaning towards the Olmec monuments is completely lost. The Olmecs are a truly lost civilization whose names we don't even know. We only call them the Olmecs because that is the name that the Aztecs, who spoke to the Spanish conquistadors in the early 1500s, named the people who were farming rubber in the Olmec area 3,000 years after the time of the Colossal Heads. The term Olmec in the Aztec language means rubber people, or people from the land of rubber. But what this civilization actually called itself, we have no idea. It far, far predates even the Maya. As I was leaving La Venta, I came across something that I didn't even know existed, a small Olmec head. Only 10 of these heads have been discovered in the Olmec world, and of those 10, I only saw 2 in person, and have been able to find only very few photos of them. Of the 2 that I've seen in person and the few that I've seen in photos, it seems that all of these small heads do not represent actual people in the same way that the colossal heads do. These small heads seem to represent what we call the were-jaguar, which causes an interesting conundrum. On one hand and one half of Olmec society, we have these giant basalt heads that are being erected, which are certainly portraits of living, breathing kings or very important men within Olmec society. But on the other hand, this more unseen side of the Olmec world is this were-jaguar, these shamanic people who present themselves as being fused with the vital essence of a jaguar. And these were-jaguars do have stone heads, but they're much, much smaller than the larger human heads. So we have an interesting conundrum here, especially after I share with you what I found just a few minutes after this. After visiting the archaeological site of La Venta, we stopped by La Venta's museum, which is something you would hardly call a museum. It was more like a large building with a metal roof, where all of the monuments from the archaeological site were moved to protect them from being further eroded. And when Dr. Barnhart and I walked in, we stopped, looked at each other, and we were both absolutely floored by what was standing right in front of us. 3 colossal limestone heads, much larger in size than any of the basalt heads. All 3 were highly eroded, and you could tell that they did not depict a human, but rather they were the were-jaguar. With the right information, you could potentially find photos of these were-jaguar heads on the internet, but if you didn't already know these heads existed, you would never find them. My estimations of these heads, which are around 5 feet wide, 4 feet deep, and around 11.5 feet tall, come out to be somewhere in the ballpark of 15 tons, maybe more. But we now have 15 known basalt heads representing figures that we can definitively say are fully human, as well as 3 huge limestone heads that represent figures that we can definitively say are were-jaguars. Shamanic crossovers between a human and a jaguar. Which makes me curious if there's some kind of correlation here between the status of a human as well as the material used to depict that person. Why do we not find limestone heads of humans and basalt heads of were-jaguars? We do see small basalt were-jaguar heads, but they are never larger than the king's heads. There's certainly something here, but the Olmec knowledge behind these reasonings are just lost to us, and it's a puzzle just waiting to be assembled. It's thought that this raising the staff symbolism may indicate this figure's authority, rulership, or his priestly and shamanic power. This figure here, although he's eroded quite badly, may also have the downturned lips of the were-jaguar. Sometimes this staff or scepter was held by the were-jaguar shaman as a sign of his divine power. We also see above him what are thought to be Olmec ancestors, perhaps guiding the Olmec civilization. One thought is that these ancestors may be engaging in combat of some kind, as it looks like they also have scepters or staffs in their hands, cocked back in a fighting position as they face towards each other. But if this is the case, it's actually the only depiction of violence and warfare in the entire Olmec world. As far as I know, in all of the Olmec realm, we have no evidence of violence or warfare of any kind. Within a few days, we arrived in a small remote village called San Lorenzo Tenochtitlan to see the artifacts that were removed from the archaeological site with the same name. Not many gringos ever visit this town, and the most recent visitor on the Ledger forum was from 4 months earlier. All of the villagers came out with little trinkets and popsicles for us to buy, and it's at this tiny museum, if you can call it that, where you'll see some of the Olmec's strangest monuments. As I walked through the gate, laying on the ground right next to this Volkswagen was a fallen basalt column that supposedly had been found in the Red Palace within the archaeological site. Now this brings up an interesting question, because Olmec architecture is supposed to have been comprised solely out of packed earth, just like the mounds we see in the United States. But these Olmec mounds had the added element of megalithic single-pieced columns and giant monuments sitting upon them, which makes imagining what Olmec architecture actually looked like extremely difficult. When we went to the archaeological site, which is really just a huge empty field where you can see the remnants of buried earthen structures beneath the ground, I went over to where the Red Palace is supposed to have been and went walking around looking for where these basalt columns would have been placed in the ground. I mean, they're considerably thick, so I thought that maybe I would see some kind of indentation in the ground and I could find a pattern, and I had no luck until I almost broke my leg by falling in one of the column holes. From what I could determine at the site, these absolutely gigantic basalt columns lined the central staircase leading up to the upper palace floor, and the groove on top of the column tells me that lintel beams, whether they were made of basalt or wood, were also placed on top of them to hold up a wooden and thatch roof. But where these other dozen or so columns are, I have no idea, and I can't find any data on it either. About 40 feet from the basalt column was a rectangular basalt slab about 10 by 12 feet. The locals didn't know what to make of it, but presumed it might have been a tool sharpening block, at least at some point in time. Well, I highly doubt that its original purpose was intended to be a giant stone sharpener. But early archaeology was pretty hasty about removing treasure and impressive monuments from their original location without properly documenting all of it first. But perhaps I shouldn't be too harsh on just archaeologists, because we do know that cultures thousands of years after the Olmecs also tampered with and were curious about these sites as well. with some of them even recreating their own smaller versions of the Olmec heads. Standing near this basalt slab was something that seemed to be an unfinished basalt head or perhaps a large altar, although I couldn't make out any distinctive telling features. One of the more surprising finds was this limestone bird statue, which I felt resembled some kind of obscure Egyptian limestone statues that I've seen lining the temples in Egypt. The detailed work in the wings was amazing, and I can only wonder what the head would have looked like or what species this was intended to be, but my thought is, with the long tail, maybe this is actually the first stone depiction of the sacred Quetzal bird in ancient Mesoamerica. I also found this depiction of what looks like a gear or some kind of clock on the bottom of a broken slab of basalt. Traditionally, the concept of gears or dials is supposed to have originated in Greece and Persia, which makes this artifact very confusing. Even now, I can hardly find any reasonable archaeological explanation for this artifact. It's just completely a mystery. One of the most thought-provoking artifacts I found while in the Olmec heartland was the El Negro monument on display at the Tres Zapotes Museum. This megalithic tenon head looks unambiguously African, and I'm very slow to ever say that the Olmec heads look like they're African because I've seen so many people in the Olmec realm who look exactly like the Olmec heads, but El Negro really stands out and fits its name. Now, I'm always very dubious, and I cast a weary eye on theories about pre-Columbian contact between the Americas and the Old World civilizations, especially when it involves contact back and forth. However, I'm very, very open to the idea of many, many different cultures discovering the Americas prior to Columbus. I think that this was something that was happening all the time, and every so often we get just a slight window into this evidence. And I'm open-minded about the fact that this El Negro monument perhaps is evidence of ancient Africans stumbling into the Americas and being introduced into Olmec society. And perhaps this is, for lack of a better term, a cameo of ancient Africans in the Olmec realm. But when it comes to people arriving in the Americas, I'm very dubious as to whether or not they were able to leave the Americas and return home. I think that much more likely is that when they arrived, they chose to stay, or they didn't survive, or perhaps they were even killed on sight. Now, there is a story about Spaniards in the Caribbean who come across a tribe in the Lesser Antilles who have these metal-tipped spear points, and they ask these people, through broken translation, where did you get this metal alloy? And they said that it came from a dark-skinned sailing tribe who came in from the east. Well, going east of there is out into the Atlantic. So perhaps they're talking about a dark-skinned group of people coming from Africa and giving the tribes people, trading with them, this black metal alloy that they called guanine. Well, linguists who specialize in ancient African languages have found a connection here where on the African west coast there are tribal civilizations that refer to the same type of metal as guanine. So you have this metal alloy of guanine in tribes among the Lesser Antilles or the Eastern Caribbean, and then in Western Africa along the coastline, you have old tribes there who are referring to guanine. Guanine, guanine. Perhaps there's some kind of connection there. But I'm very skeptical as to how prevalent and connected these trade routes actually would have been, because if the Americas did have a connection with the Old World, well, then you would see all kind of Old World crops arriving in the Americas, and then certainly within the Americas we have potatoes and corn. You would see that absolutely explode across the Old World, but we just don't see that until after the arrival of Columbus, when the world as a whole is ready to be a global civilization. It's not until that moment that this world market completely explodes. But I certainly think that we have enough evidence to at least infer that there were many, many different cultures that discovered the Americas prior to Columbus. Whether they assimilated or survived, well, that's a mystery. I'm Luke Caverns. If you'd like more videos covering the history and mysteries of places all around the world, well, please like and subscribe for more.